The 49ers just got a little more clarity. And in San Francisco, 49ers news, that matters because every little clue on the schedule can tell you something about the season before a single snap is played. Now we know 2 games, and both of them are international. Week 1 is already set against the Rams in Melbourne at the Cricket Ground. And now Week 11 is locked in too, with the 49ers heading to Mexico City to face the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football, November 22nd. That is not just another date on the calendar. That is the league putting the 49ers right in the middle of the spotlight. And on Niners News Today, that usually means there is more going on than meets the eye. And let's be honest, this is the kind of schedule news that gets a fan's mind racing immediately. You do not just see Mexico City and move on. You start thinking about travel, altitude, timing, recovery, roster depth, and whether this team is built to handle a weird kind of football environment without losing its edge. You start wondering whether this helps the 49ers or makes life harder for them. That is the fun part. That is the part that keeps Niners News alive, because the schedule is never just the schedule. It is the first puzzle piece of the whole season. What makes this even more interesting is that the opponent is Minnesota. That is a team that has been living on the international circuit lately, like they've got frequent flyer miles burning a hole in their pocket. They have already played overseas multiple times in recent seasons, and now they are right back in the mix for another one. For the 49ers, this is different terrain, but not exactly brand new territory. They have done the Mexico City thing before, and they know what that trip asks of a team. The altitude is real, the recovery matters, and the margin for error gets a little thinner when your body is adjusting while you are still trying to win a football game. So the big picture here is simple. The 49ers already know they are opening the season on the other side of the world against the Rams, and they already know they will be back in another international pressure cooker in Week 11. That is a serious travel gauntlet, and it tells you the league is not exactly easing them into anything. It is throwing them into the deep end early, then asking them to do it again after the season has already started to form a personality. And that is where the intrigue comes in, because a team like the 49ers has to prove it can stay sharp through the weird stuff, not just the normal Sunday grind. Here is the part I think every Niners fan should keep in the front of their mind. These are the kinds of games that can shape a season without looking like they will at first. Everybody talks about the big division games, the primetime matchups, the conference battles. Fine. All true. But these travel games can quietly matter just as much because they test discipline. They test preparation. They test how well a team can keep its identity when the routine gets scrambled. And if you are watching from the perspective of Niners News Today, that is exactly why this schedule update hits harder than it first looks. So the question is not just, who are the 49ers playing? The real question is, what kind of team do these games force the 49ers to become? Do they handle the travel like a veteran squad that knows how to stay locked in? Or does the extra mileage start to nibble at the edges? That is what makes this fun, and that is what makes this worth watching closely. Because the moment the NFL dropped this update, it stopped being a simple schedule note and started becoming a storyline. That Mexico City game is where this schedule update gets really spicy, because now we are not just talking about a date and an opponent. We are talking about a game that could expose teams that are not built for the long haul. And when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, the first thing that jumps out is that they have become one of the league's most traveled teams in recent seasons. They have been in Dublin, London, and Tottenham, and now they are back on the international road again. At this point, you almost have to wonder whether somebody in that building has a suitcase that never gets fully unpacked. For the 49ers, though, This is where the conversation gets sharper. This is San Francisco 49ers news, at the exact point where details start to matter more than headlines. The altitude in Mexico City is not a side. Note, it is part of the game. That changes how a team prepares, how it breathes, how it recovers, and how it manages the week leading in. That is why the 49ers have been smart in the past about getting themselves adjusted before these kinds of trips. It is not glamorous, and nobody is handing out trophies for sleeping at the right elevation, but it can absolutely matter when the fourth quarter hits and legs start feeling heavier than they should. That is why the possibility of the 49ers using Colorado Springs again makes sense. It is one of those quiet, competitive edges that does not show up in the box score, but can show up when it counts. You do not want to roll into Mexico City and hope your body figures it out on the fly. That is how teams get caught flat-footed. And the Niners know better than to walk into something like this without a plan. If there is one thing this franchise usually does well, it is preparing for the weird stuff. Sometimes people only see the game plan on Sunday, but the real work starts long before that. Now stack that against Minnesota's situation, and you get a little more intrigue. The Vikings are still sorting through their quarterback picture, and that matters because international games tend to magnify uncertainty. If your offense is still trying to find its rhythm, a strange environment can make everything feel a little louder and a little faster. And that is where the 49ers have to smell blood in the water. If you are the more stable team, if your structure is tighter, if your defense travels well, then a game like this becomes an opportunity instead of a headache. That is a big deal. And speaking of opportunity, this matchup also comes with a little extra edge because of Jauan Jennings. He is now in Minnesota, and even though he will not be lining up against the 49ers at Levi's Stadium, this still has that personal flavor to it. A lot of Niners fans probably imagined Jennings back in red and gold, making life miserable for opposing defenders and setting the tone the way he always does. Instead, he'll be on the other side, and that adds a little juice to the whole thing. Not in a petty way, just in that football way where familiar faces suddenly become part of the problem, instead of part of the solution. You know the drill. A player who used to be your guy now becomes the guy trying to beat you. That always adds a little extra crackle. The other thing worth noticing is that the venue itself is not the same old. Mexico City's setup people remember from years past. Estadio Azteca has been through renovations, upgrades, modernization, the whole works. So this is not just a recycled setting, it is a historic stadium getting dragged into the next era. That matters because it means the experience is still massive, still loud, still foreign enough to make things feel different, but with enough polish that the stage itself is built for the moment. In other words, the backdrop is going to be big enough to make this feel like a true event. And that is really the theme here. The 49ers are not just playing football in 2026. They are going to be tested by the shape of the season itself. Melbourne in Week 1. Mexico City in Week 11. That is a lot of travel, a lot of adjustment, and a lot of pressure to stay grounded. So when you hear San Francisco 49ers news talk about the schedule, do not just hear dates and locations. Hear the challenge underneath it. Hear the part where a good team has to prove it can keep its rhythm even when the world around it keeps shifting. So let me put it straight to you, Niners fan. Do you think this kind of travel helps the 49ers sharpen up early? Or does it create problems that show up later in the year? That is the real conversation. That is the part worth arguing about. Now that 2 games are officially locked in, you can finally start seeing the outline of what this season might become, and honestly, the schedule is shaping up in a way that should make every Niners fan, pay attention. Because once you get past the international headlines, the rest of the slate starts looking pretty fascinating. The 49ers still have division battles with Arizona and Seattle. They have heavyweight matchups against teams like Philadelphia and Kansas City. And then there are those sneaky, dangerous games that can swing a season when nobody expects them to. That is why this whole thing matters beyond just travel talk. Schedules create momentum. Sometimes they create chaos. And right now, it feels like the NFL is testing whether the 49ers can stay mentally sharp through a season that already looks unusual before May is even over. You open in Australia against the Rams, then later you head to Mexico City for Sunday Night Football against Minnesota. That alone is enough to make this one of the strangest travel schedules in the league. But if the 49ers handle it well, there is another side to this story nobody is talking about enough: opportunity. Because when you look at the opponent list, there are winnable stretches here. There are games where the 49ers should absolutely walk in, believing they are the better football team. And in Niners news today, that is where the conversation gets serious. It is not about surviving the schedule. It is about whether this roster is mature enough to capitalize on it. Look at some of these matchups. The Giants are still trying to figure out who they are. The Falcons can be dangerous, but they are not exactly some unstoppable force. The Raiders are always emotional games, but the 49ers have the stronger infrastructure top to bottom. Miami has talent, sure, but consistency has been a different story. Then you look at the Vikings situation, and there are still real questions there too. So even with the international circus surrounding this season, the 49ers have a path here, a very real one. Now, does that mean the schedule is easy? Absolutely not. Anybody calling an NFL schedule easy in May is basically trying to predict a storm by staring at one cloud. Things change fast in this league. Injuries happen. Teams break out. Quarterbacks suddenly catch fire. One locker room speech can flip an entire season sideways. But from a pure football logic standpoint, the 49ers are positioned better than some people realize. And here is the hidden factor that could decide everything: depth. Because the travel only becomes a killer if your roster cannot absorb the wear and tear. That is why teams with veteran leadership usually survive these stretches better. They know how to pace themselves. They know how not to emotionally empty the tank in September. The 49ers have enough experienced players to understand that the season is not a sprint. It is a long, bruising climb where discipline matters just as much as talent. That is also why these early San Francisco 49ers news schedule leaks matter so much to fans who really study the team. You can already start imagining where the pressure points are going to be. You can already see the stretches where Kyle Shanahan may need to rotate smarter, where recovery days become critical, where one sloppy week could snowball into 2 losses instead of 1. That is the chess match underneath the football. And I will say this too. There is something kind of fitting about the NFL putting the 49ers on the global stage like this. Whether people love the team or cannot stand them, the league knows San Francisco draws attention. The logo travels. The fan base travels. The conversation travels. That is why the 49ers keep getting these marquee spots. The NFL is not handing those games out randomly like candy at a parade. They know people tune in when the Niners are involved. So now the countdown really starts. Thursday brings the full schedule release, and once that happens, every fan is going to start circling wins, losses, trap games, revenge games, and playoff pivots, like detectives working a cork board with red string everywhere. That is part of the beauty of football. Hope arrives early. Debate arrives even earlier. But right now, the biggest takeaway is this: The 49ers are walking into a season that already feels bigger than normal. More travel, more spotlight, more pressure, and maybe, just maybe, more opportunity too. So now I want to hear from you. Which game are you circling first once the full schedule drops? And do you think these international games help sharpen this team? Or do they create a disadvantage that could show up late in the season? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss any San Francisco 49ers news, Niners news, or Niners News Today coverage right here on the channel. We are pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and every single Niners fan joining this community helps build this thing stronger week after week. Share the video with another faithful fan, keep the conversation rolling in the comments, and let's see where this season takes us.